the southeast and some regional species that you guys at the Xerces Society have deemed as good species to survey. And I think on the prospect that they are easily identifiable for the survey. And so, yeah, you have anything here from Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and into Florida is the focus region for these species. And the first one is Lucidota luticalis. I've mentioned this one before. It's the Florida scrub dark firefly. I have seen them a few times out going collecting, and it's quite interesting to watch them. When they're out, the males are very abundant at times, flying over these sandy habitats. And you will find these in the central ridges and uplands ecoregions of Florida, and then in the tri-habitats of southern Georgia. So it reaches into Georgia. There is a fact sheet out by the Xerces Society that was published last year, I want to say, or 2021 or 2022, that you can also get a little more information. It has a little more information about the distribution based on like actual specimens and collection events. So, and you have to find these dry scrub sandhill habitats, where they usually have longleaf pines and sandy soils. That's where you will find them. And on a sunny day, they will be out basically in large numbers, flying around over the sand, looking for females. The females, as you can see one here on the right, bottom right, from Jim Lloyd's book in 2018, do not fly. They have very, very short wing butts. You can see a little bit that black spot here. And they apparently bury into the sand. So the males will fly around looking for females. And a good way to find the females is to wait them out to land on the sand. And, you know, hopefully there is a female to mate with. And that's, I think, one of the more easy ways to get a female. So they're already out here in Florida, March to September, and especially last month in April. They may be a little later this year just because of the really weird weather we had lately, with a lot of like short little colder times, and not really super warm yet, and a lot of rain. So they might be out a little, like peaking a little later than usual in April. So, and then during the daytime, and I think early afternoon is probably the best time to get them. When I usually saw them. And then also another good way is to put up a flight intercept or malaise trap in the field if you have permission to do that. I've seen large collections of these guys by doing that. They will just, it's basically just some kind of like net that stands upright in the field that has like a little net roof, and insects will fly into it and either fall down from impact, and you put like some kind of like metal, oh gosh, what's the word? Like metal with like alcohol or so into it, and then they fall into it and die, or they crawl up and there's like collecting reservoirs at the top. And I've seen large numbers collected that way, but there is a lot of bycatch doing that if you just do it for this. And then they're fairly small, I'd say, like maybe like 5 millimeters. And they are very distinct, I think, especially in Florida. You have this really like bright orange head shield, the pronotum, and also the tip of the abdomen, as you can see here, but in the picture of Brandon Wu, is also orange. The pygidium here. And then the antennae are flattened, and serrate, not very strongly serrate, like in Lucidota, but still serrated, like sawtooth-like. And just look for them flying low along trails and rest on vegetation. So that's the best way, I think, to get them. And when they're out, in my experience, they're out. Like they're basically dozens to 100 or maybe hundreds out, and males will be easy to find. I think what would be really nice for observations for you guys, for Richard and the Firefly Atlas, would probably be females. They're very rarely collected. And as far as I know, we have probably over 100 specimens of the male. We do not have a single female in the collection here at the FSCA. So if you want to chime in, Richard.
Just a couple things. One is that don't go by color alone, because in the habitats that this firefly occurs in, there are probably dozens of other insects that are in the same mimicry complex, with that kind of orange towards the head and the tail, or the pygidium. So just remember, you're looking for a head shield that covers most of the head, and in this case, those flattened serrated antennae. I mean, even like love bugs have kind of a similar color pattern, so it'll take a little while to sort through those. And then just an interesting observation as well, it has been observed that the males do have these tiny lanterns that are still functional but not used for courtship. So someone at Archbald Biological Station had a story of keeping a couple in a vial by his bed at night, just to see, wake up and see if they were flashing. And they weren't flashing, and then he knocked the vial over, and that disturbance elicited kind of a protective or defensive little glow or flash. So just a little fun fact.
Yeah. But yeah, so be on the lookout for those guys. Yes, and like you said, there's a lot of mimicry. You will see some lycids or some soldier beetles that are very good mimics of that. But then again, like Richard said, look for the head shield covering the head. And in the case of lycids that also have very serrated antennae, look for the elytra being smooth, more smooth than in lycids. Lycids have this really reticulated, net-winged, they're called net-winged beetles. Yeah, they have like really, you can see they're really more rough elytra than this one does. So that's a good way to keep them apart. But yeah, there's a mimicry is going strong in a lot of places, and this one is definitely one in that area. The love bug looks, yes, also very similar, but it doesn't have a orange or reddish pygidium, so that's a good way to keep them apart. The next one is the Florida intertidal firefly, Micronaspis floridana, and I think Richard and Candace are working on getting this one protected soon, which is probably a good idea since the habitat is in danger from climate change. So these can be found in the coastal regions of Florida, including the Florida Keys, and also it's been collected in the Bahamas. How far north they go, we don't really know. Definitely till here, Cedar Key, probably much higher. Richard has been just here in Florida looking for these guys, but I think just in southern Florida. The habitats to survey are the salt marshes and mudflats, mangroves in that area, and just in the close to the intertidal zone. And these guys will fly around there. The larvae live actually in the salt, in the mudflats and the salt marshes. Be careful, there's some vegetation that can be dangerous to survey in. I'm not familiar with what species it is, but there's this vegetation that comes up and it's very pointy. And if you don't pay attention and you go bend down too fast to collect one of the larvae, you might poke your eyes out. So I always, when I look for these guys, have safety glasses on. But you have to be very aware of your surroundings for that. There's records for year-round, but March to May is the main season, so right now. To find the adults, it's just after sunset, like 40 minutes after sunset, and a few hours, a couple hours or so after sunset, you can see them flying. I wouldn't say they're very abundant. If you see them flying, that's usually like a few. I've never seen more than 2 or 3, I think, when I've seen them. That might be different in other further south or in other habitats than I've been when I looked in Cedar Key. Maybe Richard can chime in a little bit to talk about what he observed down in southern Florida. What you look for is a yellowish green flash every 2 to 3 seconds, and the males are quite low. If you have a good net or so, they're fairly easy to catch, I think. And bright flashes in the beginning, then they kind of like dim down a bit. Females sometimes in groups, perch on vegetation, and they have a prolonged modulated flash glow combination. And you can see the male flash pattern here from Lynn Frost's book at the top. That's how that about looks at 75 degrees. So it might be a little faster if it gets hotter than that. Usually it's not much hotter than that during their peak season here, especially on the coast. And here's a nice picture from by Richard, and you can see how the head shield is kind of transparent. You can see that the maculations, the red part is a little raised. And then another good way to look at them is to see if they have the split or bifid claws. One side of the claw is bifid. But I think you could mistake these for tinus. That's, I think, the closest one that you could mistake these for. And then here is also by Richard, a nice picture of the habitat, some kind of like the habitat that you would find these guys. Even alongside like roads, they will be flying on the side of the road. So, so if you have anything.
Yeah, I'll just say that in some ways, Micronaspis floridana, or the Florida intertidal firefly, in some ways, it's one of the easiest species to survey for, because its habitats are so specialized that you can really kind of zero in on the place to look. And then also it's fairly unusual in the US to be able to have larvae and adults in the same place at the same time that are both identifiable to species. So the time window for seeing adult flashes may be a little more brief. As Oliver said, maybe 30 to 40 minutes after sunset, you'll see flashes, and then there'll be a peak period of flashes, and then they'll sort of stay active, but be a lot quieter. But the presence of the larvae in the very upper intertidal zone, sometimes crawling on mangrove roots, or if you're in northern areas, maybe on the salt marsh vegetation, gives you kind of a wider window for detecting this species. The mosquitoes can be intense, so I think a good the earlier in the season that you can survey for them, the more pleasant it will be. And it's worth looking for larvae, even in the cold months, because they may be active year round.
Yeah. So, right, the next Pleotomodes, neathami. There's only 2 species in the genus, as we talked about before. This one is an ant-loving scrub firefly. Really cool natural history, living with ants. That's another paper I will upload to you from Savinsky, who was a student of Jim Lloyd's. They did a nice paper where they excavated an ant nest and looked at the females and the larvae and the immatures living in the ant nest, and the females would come out at night and sit on top of the ant nest, usually harvester ants, and flash glow to lure in males. The survey region for this guy, neathami, the central ridges and the uplands ecoregion of Florida. Currently, I think we only have records for this from Highlands County and Polk County in Florida. The other species is much more widespread, from which reaches down from Miami all the way up here to north of Gainesville. So it would be nice if we could find some other observations from different counties in Florida, maybe north of Highlands. Very abundant apparently in at the research station down in Highlands County. A couple of colleagues of mine were just there like 3 weeks ago, and they found a bunch of the males flying around. And that's like the oak scrub and woodlands with dry sandy soil habitat. And look for harvester ants, so like fungus growing ants, trapjaw ants, and also permit or cone ants. Are some of the nests that they will find them in. Late March through July, and yes, April, May seems to be very much the biggest like diverse concentration of species coming out, and I think my colleagues going there in April, mid-April, and they're seeing so many is quite good evidence that that's the truth. And then shortly after dark, so just shortly after dark, they start flying. When you see the males flying and you see them going lower and lower, look for ant nests. Maybe during the day, make yourself familiar in a place where you want to look for them. If there's any of the ant nests, maybe I don't know if you have permission, mark the ant nests or so that you can find them easily, and then see if the males go down and look for females in an ant nest, and if there's any females out. Just right next to the entrance is always where the females will sit at night. And then here's a nice picture by Richard of one of the ant nests. So this is basically what you should look for in a sandy habitat. And then this is like a harvester ant nest, which is like usually like half moon or sickle shape, kind of like, and has like fresh soil out. This is kind of like where you should look for. And like I said, during night, if you mark them, you might have a better chance of actually finding the females, because if you know where they are, and then look for males and look for what they're doing, and then you may be able to observe the glow or flash response of the females as well. Candace?
Can I add something?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, when Richard and I went surveying for this species last year, we did a daytime scout to look for ant nests and kind of note where they were, so we could see them in the evening. But the lone individual that we did find that you had a picture of, Oliver, I don't recall there actually being an ant nest nearby that we could see. Richard, correct me if I'm wrong. So we knew that there were ants in the area and like close by, but we were kind of expecting to see them glowing right by the entrance, because that's what all the literature says, and that was not the case. So keep your eyes peeled for other areas too, not just right at the ant nest entrances.
Did you find it by looking at a male coming close to it, or did you just see it glow?
We just happened to see it glowing as we were walking. Yeah.
Yeah, looking for light. We have a good question from Shannon in the Q&A, and that's about the males bioluminescing. I would guess that they don't flash. Oliver, I've actually never seen a ventral view of them. Do they have lanterns?
I'm thinking right now. They may not. They may just use chemicals as their, which is weird because their antennae do not suggest this. They have fairly normal antennae, like a filiform, but I can't answer that right now. And my collection is currently in the freezer. I cannot go and look.
Shannon, I believe the answer is no. I think I recall Mark Dayrup from Archibald Biological Station seeing that you'll find the males like coming to black lights, but you won't see them like glowing and flying around with a sustained glow.
I think they readily come to black light though, the males, so that's probably maybe the easiest way to get them. And then larvae live inside the end nest with the females, as far as we can tell. And I think Savinsky, in his paper, they dug one out, the whole nest and end nest, and they looked for them, and I think they found them in the end nest. But the relationship between the ants and larvae or the female is, I'm not quite sure. My guess would be that they're more like unwanted guests in the end nest with some kind of chemical protection so they don't get thrown out. But that's like, I think, definitely a little more information in the Savinsky paper, and I will put that in the folder at the end of today's session so you can read about it. If the males have any kind of light organ, it will be very weak, I think, but probably not. Yes. But if you put a black light up somewhere, I think they come in fairly readily. So, so next is Photinus species, Photinus acuminatus, which Lindfors gave the common name pointy-lobed fireflies. And these guys you can find in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, North Carolina, and South Carolina. There was not too much information online or in any papers about this one. Not much is known about it. Besides that, you look in mesic forests and forest margins, shrubby wetlands is where these can be found. I think it's a very pretty firefly and maybe one of the more easily identifiable one, even based on like how the habitus looks. Very tight window in July, so that doesn't help either. You look at twilight, and then again for a short duration only it's out. Very sharp, bright flash, one flash, just 100 milliseconds. Again, very few specimens, even in collections. I think we have one or two here that Jim Lloyd donated to us. Very big distribution, it seems, but still very, very rare. And here on the right, you have a picture of the genitalia. Also, slightly different looking from a lot of other Photinus genitalia, a little more, the median lobe is a little shorter than usual, and the lateral lobes, lobes are very long. But yeah, this is a good picture for identification. I think this is also very distinctive looking for most, from most other Photinus species. Here's a picture of the type. The type is at the California Academy of Sciences. You can see pinned specimens discolor very badly. You can basically not see any of the red really anymore. I mean, there's like a little bit, but not really. And the like very dark black and bright yellow, I think, it's really gone. And then here's the original description had drawings of the genitalia, and the type was collected at the base of Mount Pisgah in North Carolina. So this is the type location. Collecting specimens from there is always a plus, and I think that would really help maybe for the future if someone wants to redescribe the species in more detail. I think that would really help to go and collect at the type location if they're still found there. I'm not sure about that, but that would be, I think, a good place to do it. And you can see a very interesting genitalia, and I think the drawing looks a little bit different from the actual dissected genitalia that Luis took pictures of. So there's also variation. So don't be like, if it looks slightly different, don't be worried about that. So have you collected this, Richard?
I have, totally by accident, and this was, I was looking for the Loopy 5 Firefly, Photurus foresti, in the kind of foothills of the Blue Ridge in South Carolina. And while we were waiting for it to get dark enough for Loopy 5 fireflies, there was this nice Photinus display. And I collected a single specimen and then kind of forgot about it. And it was only months later when it was dissected by Luis Silveira at Western Carolina University that we realized that it was something different. So it's a good lesson for the value of collecting when you can. The pointy-lobed firefly is not an official focal species for the Firefly Atlas because it absolutely requires dissection, and thus it's not as kind of accessible to survey for your average community scientist. But it's a neat story. And Oliver, I do have a video.
Yeah, I have the video. This is on the next. That's on the next. This is a video.
It's pretty generic, but
of the flash patterns. You can see the very short single flash, but also very bright, given that it's not very dark yet outside, but you can clearly see those flashes. And that's kind of like, do you know where this was taken?
This was taken in Greenville County, South Carolina, in Ashmore Heritage Preserve.
Okay, so it's kind of like the habitat you're looking for, it seems. So Ishvari, yes, it seems so. Yes, like right in the beginning, Robert. There's a lot of them, but it's only one.
Yeah, you kind of have to lean forward.
Yeah, maybe turning the light off or so where you are might help to get you seeing more. So, all right. Our next one is Photurus foresti, described by the late Jim Lloyd, Loopy 5. Very cool flash pattern. We're going to have a couple pictures on another slide. middle elevations of Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, and North Carolina. The edges and inlets of ponds, or open riparian wetlands, often beaver influenced. I think the original species was found, but when Jim found it, and it was shortly after a bulldoze, and maybe I think it may have been like made a golf course after that, and Jim was very afraid of that the species had been lost after that, but I think we actually found some more locations since, but Jim was very worried about that. Mid-May to late June, 3 to 4 weeks there, so it's very limited phenology. Flash train of 5 to 7 flashes, about 3 seconds long, and it rises and falls vertically over marshy vegetation. You can capture this with a cell phone if you're able to get close enough to one. And then make sure what you see is the flash pattern, because Photorus tremulans is very similar and overlaps in time and habitat. So you kind of have to, the flash pattern is very important here. The specimen by itself, as you can see on the bottom right, it looks like in my opinion, like a very generic Photorus, with, the head shield with the black median vita and then the red around it. So be aware of the flash pattern, which looks like this. These are pictures of Radim Schreiber from fireflyexperience.org, and this is how the flash pattern kind of looks. So 3 or 4 of these single flashes, and then these more elongated flashes after that. I think very distinctive flash pattern, very different from tremulans, but you have to observe the flash pattern, and in that case, make sure that you do collect that particular one. And I think the next slide has a video again of this one. I'm gonna play.
They're fast enough that it looks like they just hold his lantern.
You see it on the left side. There's a couple of them in the beginning and now, where they do this like, I played again, where they do this kind of like loop.
They're fast enough that it looks like they just hold his lantern on. You can't see, it's a little too hot to see the flicker.
So just to answer Krista, I'm not sure. I have to look which papers are in there. If the paper with the diagram of the drawings of the genitalia is not in the folder, we can add it. After the session today, I can add that one. But I'm not 100% sure if that paper was in there. Richard?
Yeah, I'll just say that I can share my own experience a little bit. When I first started in my role at Xerces, I was living in South Carolina, so in the same state that this species was described from. And as I was still pretty new to fireflies myself, I had this, question of whether I was going to be able to recognize species out in the field. And I will say that I did start by going to a known location for the species and getting to see it there. But even in other places, it really has a distinctive flash pattern that stands out against other flash patterns. And the name really is apt. If you're counting really quickly to catch all the flashes, and those flashes are going up and down in really kind of unpredictable, whimsical ways. That's the Loopy 5 flash pattern, and it is they seem to be closely related to Photorus tremulans, which will occur in this in the more upland areas nearby, but they're really not overlapping in flash pattern, which is kind of fascinating. The hypothesis that Jim Lloyd had for why they're doing this vertical flight is that the females are perched in the kind of tall grass in the marsh. And they don't actually have a very clear view of the sky. So the male is trying to concentrate his display in a horizontally kind of compressed space, so that one, he gives her lots of chances to see him, and he has the chance to see if she responds.
Okay. All right, this might be the last one, maybe. Futurus valdoxii. This was described by Lynn Frost with in a paper with her colleague Davis. This is called the cypress firefly, so you can, you know it's going to be found in bald cypress swamps, floodplain forests, and again early May to mid-June. So right now again, you can find this apparently fairly in big distribution. So Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Illinois, and Indiana, and up to between 300 and 600 feet elevation. Again, typical looking for tourists there you see on the right side. On the bottom is a picture of the genitalia. It's we have a paratype here at the collection. It's a very interesting firefly. About 35 to 45 minutes after sunset, an hour to about 2.5 hours after that, and they flash between 60 and 80, high 80 degree, low 60s and high 80s in Fahrenheit. So also very low 60s is very unusual for fireflies. A lot of fireflies might will in most cases not flash readily in the 60s. Flash pattern is, when I have pictures of this, between 4 and 9 blinks, followed by about 1 second glow. The next slide has pictures of this. Interestingly, it has been found further north than the native range of the bald cypress in Indiana and Illinois. So looking for non-cypress forests, wetlands with gum trees in those areas is worth checking if you are up there. Futurus foresti and this one seem to be very closely related. And there possibly is an overlap in Alabama. I don't think anybody has found this yet, but there possibly is. And this on the left side here is kind of like how the flash pattern looks. And you can see a wide variety already between the blinks. So there might be just 4, there might be up to 9. And then at the end, this elongated glow. And as you can see, different ways of A, they're fairly drawn out. In E, they're really drawn out. And then in C, they're kind of all like bunched up together. And then here on the right side from the original paper, you have the habitat of Valdoxii. And I think this is the actual type location in Waldoxie State Park in Mississippi. But this is kind of like where you would look for them. On this one, be aware, be careful. You need rubber boots to be in this if you want to catch them. And again, make sure you know your surroundings, make sure you have permission to do what, if you go collecting them. But I think the glow pattern or the flash pattern is very distinctive again, where if just for observations, this is one of the more easily identifiable Futurus species. Have you collected these, Richard?
I have not. I'm hoping to see them for the first time this later in June.
Okay.
So
yeah, Lynn, if you have any questions further, then Lynn Frost is an amazing resource. She discovered this one I know she was in contact with Jim Lloyd at the time still about it, and seems to be a very nice flash display. And I don't know how many, if you will be able to see like dozens and dozens of them, or if it's just like single specimens. But it seems to be a very nice flash display, and kind of like really nice habitat to hang out, I think. So this one is definitely one to look for, and I don't think there's, yeah, we would love to find new habitats for them in new places where they can be found. So, and then this is the last species actually, Parectomina ecostata, the keel-necked firefly, which refers to that keel on the head shield, coasts of Alabama and Florida. I have found them overlapping in the same habitat as Micronaspis floridana. I've collected them within 50 meters of each other. Close to the salt marshes again, black needle rush marshes. Those are probably the ones that you can poke your eyes out, black needle rush. Mangrove swamp, wet roadside ditches. I have found these in a good amount of numbers in Cedar Key again, year round, given the weather in this region. You can find these year round. I would say, to be honest, peak is probably right now as well. After dark, flash activity beginning about 50 minutes after sunset. And every time I've seen these so far, for tourists were hanging out with them as well. I've always had these in connection with the tourists. They have pale stripes down the middle of the elytra, which we're going to see a little later in the mid-Atlantic section. They look a little bit artificially or superficially like a Futurus species. They're fairly big, up to 16 millimeters. Single bright greenish yellow explosive flash. So yes, it's very fast, but it's very bright, about every 8 seconds. And like I said, keep an eye out for Micronaspis, absolutely the same habitat. And then apparently they come to porch lights in these coastal areas for incidental observations. So that's also a good way to find them. I have not had a black light out, so I'm not sure if they would come to a black light. Worth trying, I think, next time I go out. Not very many observations. I think when I caught this first, it may have been the first observation on Bug Guide, or maybe the second. A few more on iNaturalist, but it's also a very nice species and a very nice flash. I think a very interesting flash pattern and nice to see. But it's very like distinctive from Futurus by its like super bright and fast flash. And Richard was just out collecting these, I think.
So I've seen the species in Delaware, but never in Florida. So
okay.
Oliver, I have a question for you, and that is, when you've seen them flashing in Florida, is their height above the ground relatively high? Because my experience in the mid-Atlantic was that this firefly, especially compared to the Photurus, that would be quite low to the vegetation, that these fireflies would be maybe head height or like 8 feet off the ground.
Yeah, there was not really much vegetation, so this was on the road, in like over a roadside ditch, so not like fairly. It was freshly mowed, I think, so that was not much. But yes, they were about head high. Fast flyers, hard to catch. It took me a while. I think I caught like way more Futurus than I caught any of those guys, just because they were flying so much faster than the Futurus were. I got like 2 or 3, I think, after an hour. There were definitely more out, but they're fast flyers. So, but yeah, they fly definitely higher than the Futurus. But the Futurus definitely. Next time I have to go and look for more females, but I'm sure the females will try to make that flash pattern and answer them and see if they can lure them in.